These are the terrifying 48 hours when Florida's national fire exploded from a small brush fire into a 35,000-acre inferno that shut down major highways and created deadly superfog conditions across one of America's most dangerous wildfire corridors, marking one of the most dangerous starts to Florida's 2026 wildfire season. On the night of February 22, 2026, what started as routine wildfire activity in Big Cypress National Preserve became something far more sinister. Within 2 days, this blaze grew nearly 7 times larger, consuming an area bigger than Manhattan and creating conditions so hazardous that Interstate 75, Florida's main artery known as Alligator Alley, was completely shut down in the dead of night. But here's what makes this story truly alarming. This wasn't just another wildfire. The national fire, as it came to be known, struck during the worst drought Florida had seen in 25 years. At a time when 100% of the state was experiencing drought conditions and 67% was under extreme drought warnings. The Keach-Byram Drought Index readings across South Florida were reaching critical levels. It was a perfect storm of environmental factors that turned what should have been a manageable brush fire into a nightmare scenario that cost over $1.2 million to fight and required nearly 200 firefighters from multiple states. To understand why this fire became so dangerous so quickly, you need to know about Big Cypress National Preserve itself. Located about 25 miles east of Naples and 45 miles west of Miami, near the small community of Ochapee, this 720,000-acre wilderness is part of the Greater Everglades ecosystem. It's a region tourists know as Alligator Alley, for obvious reasons. Prime habitat for Florida's most famous predators. But in February 2026, it became hunting grounds for something far more destructive. The preserve sits at the intersection of 2 major highways, Interstate 75, which carries hundreds of thousands of vehicles between Florida's east and west coasts, and State Road 29, which connects rural communities to the main transportation corridor. When fire threatens this area, it doesn't just burn wilderness. It cuts off escape routes and creates deadly driving conditions that have killed dozens of people in similar incidents. The morning of February 23rd brought the first real signs that this fire was different. Area closures were immediately implemented inside the preserve as the blaze, initially estimated at 5,000 acres, began its explosive growth. Fire officials knew they were dealing with exceptional conditions. As firefighting spokeswoman Riki Hoops later explained, "It's an exceptionally dry year." But dry doesn't begin to capture the severity of what firefighters were facing. The drought conditions across Florida were historic. Since January 1st, 2026, the Florida Forest Service had already recorded more than 650 wildfires statewide, twice the number from the same period in 2024. Burn bans were in effect across 34 Florida counties. The state was essentially a tinderbox waiting for a spark. Chase Albritton, a drone operator and hurricane chaser who witnessed the fire's early growth, captured the perfect description of conditions. It wasn't just dry, it was also fairly windy, which is what allowed for the fire to spread. Those winds proved to be a critical factor in the fire's rapid expansion and the creation of one of Florida's most dangerous weather phenomena. By February 24th, the fire had doubled to over 10,000 acres. By the 25th, it had more than doubled again, reaching 24,000 acres. This wasn't normal fire behavior. This was explosive growth fueled by a combination of drought, wind, and an abundance of fuel that tells a larger story about Florida's recent environmental challenges. Much of the fuel feeding this inferno came from an unexpected source: hurricane debris. Florida had been hammered by multiple hurricanes in recent years, leaving behind what fire officials described as staggering amounts of dead vegetation. Some forests now contained nearly 100 tons of felled trees and dead underbrush per acre. To put that in perspective, if you cut that debris into firewood, it would be enough to stack several dump trucks worth around the perimeter of a football field. When wildfire encounters that much kindling, the physics of combustion change dramatically. The fire burns hotter, spreads faster, and becomes exponentially harder to control. This wasn't just a grass fire anymore. It was a furnace consuming decades of accumulated organic matter. The real crisis began at 12:15 a.m. on February 26th, That's when the Florida Department of Transportation made the unprecedented decision to completely close Interstate 75 between exit 80 and exit 23, a stretch of nearly 60 miles of one of Florida's most critical transportation arteries. The reason was both simple and terrifying. Drivers couldn't see. Heavy smoke from the national fire had mixed with humid nighttime air and dropping temperatures to create what meteorologists call super fog, a phenomenon that transforms smoke into a whiteout condition similar to a Colorado blizzard but filled with toxic particles and ash. In super fog conditions, drivers often can't see more than 10 feet in front of their vehicles. This isn't theoretical danger. Super fog has a deadly history in Florida. In January 2008, smoke from a prescribed burn in Polk County mixed with morning fog, creating super fog conditions that caused a 70-vehicle pileup on Interstate 4, killing 5 people. Just 4 years later, in January 2012, a similar super fog event near Payne's Prairie Preserve State Park led to a series of crashes involving 25 vehicles that killed 11 people. Florida emergency officials weren't taking any chances. The highway remained closed until visibility improved, stranding thousands of travelers and effectively cutting Florida in half. When the road finally reopened later on February 26, the fire had grown to 25,780 acres and remained 0% contained. That same day, command of the firefighting operation was transferred to the Southern Area Gray Team, a Type 1 incident management team, the highest tier of federal wildfire response, led by Incident Commander Fulton Jeansino. This transfer signaled that the national fire had officially exceeded local capabilities and required specialized expertise from one of the nation's elite wildfire management teams. The resources being deployed told the story of just how serious this fire had become. By February 26th, 120 personnel were on the ground with 14 engines, 3 helicopters, and 3 single-engine air tankers. Within 48 hours, that number would grow to 197 personnel as firefighters from multiple states converged on Big Cypress. But numbers alone don't capture the complexity of fighting a fire. In this environment, Big Cypress isn't just wilderness, it's wetlands, sawgrass, cypress domes, and pine rocklands. It's terrain that can be inaccessible to ground crews and difficult for aircraft to navigate safely. When you add smoke conditions that can ground helicopters and limit visibility for pilots, the tactical challenges become immense. February 27th brought no relief. The fire grew to over 30,000 acres and remained completely uncontained. Smoke continued to plague Alligator Alley, creating hazardous driving conditions and forcing authorities to maintain heightened alert status along the corridor. The situation reached a critical point on February 28th, when Florida Highway Patrol made the decision to close State Road 29 from Interstate 75 to US 41 from 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. This wasn't just about traffic management. Fire crews were conducting defensive burning operations, intentionally setting fires to create fire breaks that would deny fuel to the main blaze when it reached the road. As firefighting spokeswoman Ricky Hoops explained the strategy, most of the acreage gained was from defensive burns overnight to keep the fire from hitting the road hard. This will help eliminate the fuel along the road, so when the fire hits, it will give it a buffer. It's a counterintuitive tactic that actually increases the fire's footprint in the short term, but can prevent much more catastrophic spread later. That same day brought the fire's first direct threat to human habitation. Authorities implemented a voluntary evacuation of Jerome, a small community in the path of the advancing flames. While the evacuation was voluntary, the message was clear. Residents needed to be prepared to leave immediately if conditions deteriorated. The cost of fighting this fire was escalating rapidly. By late February, suppression costs had reached $1.2 million, and climbing. That figure represents not just the daily operational costs of personnel, equipment, and aircraft, but the specialized resources required for this type of complex wildfire response. February 28th evening brought the first significant progress. The fire had grown to 35,034 acres, but finally achieved 27% containment. For firefighters who had been battling this blaze for nearly a week, containment represented light at the end of the tunnel. But with over 25,000 acres still burning, and unpredictable weather conditions, the fire remained far from controlled. March 1st marked a turning point. The voluntary evacuation of Jerome was lifted, and State Road 29 reopened to normal traffic. The fire's growth had largely stabilized, allowing crews to focus on full suppression rather than defensive tactics. By March 2nd, the national fire had reached 53% containment, while holding steady at approximately 35,034 acres. The crisis phase was over, but the implications were just beginning to be understood. To put the size of this fire in perspective, the national fire burned an area larger than Manhattan. It exceeded the Sandy Fire that had burned through the same area just 3 years earlier, which consumed nearly 20,000 acres. The rapid growth and intensity of the national fire represented a new benchmark for wildfire behavior in South Florida. The fire's location also highlighted some uncomfortable realities about Florida's development patterns. Just miles away from the burning preserve sits Alligator Alcatraz, a state-run immigration detention facility that opened in July 2025, with capacity for 3,000 detainees, expandable to 5,000. While emergency officials stated the fire posed no threat to the facility, its proximity underscored how Florida's rapid development has pushed infrastructure into increasingly fire-prone areas. The broader context makes this fire even more concerning. Florida Forest Service Director Rick Dolan had already warned that 2026 could be a particularly dangerous fire season. Several factors could make this a busy wildfire season, he explained, including leftover debris from multiple hurricanes and forecasts calling for less rain this spring. Rebecca Patterson from the National Interagency Fire Center in Boise, Idaho, was even more direct. The most likely outcome is a spring fire season with above-normal fire activity, and an early onset of the most active part of the fire season. The national fire proved these predictions accurate. By the time it was brought under control, 154 firefighters from multiple states had been deployed, along with 14 engines, 3 water tenders, 4 helicopters, and 3 single-engine air tankers. The operation required coordination between the National Park Service, Florida Forest Service, Florida Highway Patrol, and multiple federal agencies. What makes this fire particularly significant isn't just its size or intensity, it's what it represents for Florida's future. Climate scientists have long warned that the combination of urban development, drought conditions, and accumulated wildfire fuel creates the perfect conditions for catastrophic fires. The national fire offered a preview of what that might look like. The 1998 Florida firestorm remains the benchmark for wildfire devastation in the state. From April to July that year, nearly 500,000 acres burned. Hundreds of structures were destroyed, and damage exceeded $600 million. At one point, all 130,000 residents of Flagler County were evacuated, and smoke reached downtown Orlando 50 miles away. 3 people died. No one is suggesting the national fire approached that level of destruction, but the similarities are troubling. Both events occurred during periods of exceptional drought, following cold snaps that killed vegetation and created additional fuel loads. Both demonstrated how quickly conditions can deteriorate and how vulnerable Florida's transportation infrastructure is to wildfire impacts. The national fire also highlighted the increasing sophistication required to fight modern wildfires. The incident management team structure, multi-agency coordination, and specialized equipment deployment represent decades of lessons learned from wildfire disasters across the American West. Florida is essentially importing Western fire management expertise to deal with its own growing wildfire challenges. Looking ahead, the lessons from the national fire are sobering. Florida's fire season is shifting earlier in the year. Drought conditions are becoming more severe, and the accumulation of hurricane debris is creating unprecedented fuel loads. The state that once worried primarily about hurricanes and flooding now faces the very real possibility of catastrophic wildfire as a regular seasonal threat. The national fire burned for over 2 weeks before reaching full containment. During that time, it consumed 35,034 acres, cost over $1.2 million to suppress, required nearly 200 firefighters, forced highway closures that stranded thousands of travelers, and created deadly superfog conditions that have killed dozens in previous incidents. But perhaps more importantly, it served as a wake-up call about the new environmental realities facing Florida. The combination of climate change, Urban development pressures and natural disaster cycles is creating conditions that the state has never faced before. The national fire won't be the last time Florida faces this kind of crisis. It might just be the first of many. In a state where hurricane season dominates emergency planning, wildfire season is rapidly becoming equally dangerous, equally unpredictable, and equally capable of changing lives in a matter of hours. The question isn't whether Florida will face another national fire. It's whether the state will be better prepared when it does.